Here on News Desk, and I'm grateful for your company. So let's continue our conversation on media and press freedom generally. And with me in the studio is Dr. Reku Brobe. He is with GIPO, and I'm sure he will get my head for not giving GIPO in full. But, well, thank you very much for joining us here. You're welcome.
Thank you, Gamini. Good to see you.
I know GIPO has an event.
Well, tomorrow we are taking the opportunity to look at the whole of the broadcasting situation in Ghana since the advent of My Name Tarzan and the onset of Radio I. We've had private media in Ghana now for 20 years. Coming up
That's a long
tomorrow.
time.
But there's never been a review of what is happening, and essentially we seem to be playing by the hoof. I mean, I've listened to the interview you were having with the GJ. Yeah, it's true that you need laws, but you need more than laws. You need action, because laws without being tested cannot really be said to be laws. The Constitution is a nice document. Everything in this is very, very nice. But governments and rulers tend to not want to give the people who gave them the power the right to exercise the constitutional right. So tomorrow what we are doing is that we are celebrating, because up till then we had a GBC FM station and the Radio Fusion stations. GBC FM used to broadcast from 9 o'clock, from 10 o'clock in the morning till 2 p.m. Then the valves got too hot and then they stopped. But the most important thing was that here we were in a democracy. The state controls the media. So if people are going to make choices as to who should govern them, and the ruling government was in charge of the media, then really it wouldn't work. And we looked at the Constitution, and specifically Article 1623, which says you can set up private media without a license. So for us, the law is very clear, and we decided to exercise that option.
I see. So that's how far we've come. We'll get back to that conversation, but let's start off from where David and I left off,
Yes.
with regards to comments from the Speaker of Parliament about the media being reckless and unprofessional since the repeal of the libel law. What are your thoughts about that?
I disagree with the Speaker. I think the media is probably a little out of control in the sense that there are too many of them, and therefore you are bound to have bad nuts and good nuts. Unfortunately, there are too many bad nuts, and there are too many people who are unschooled in the profession who speak out of turn and use language which is unbecoming. But that's quite different from saying that, they are not telling the truth. Because when you examine what the Speaker said, actually, what did the media do? Parliament took a decision which was diametrically contrary to what the President was trying to promote. Nothing any media said was wrong or irresponsible. Now, no journalist in Ghana is exempt from the laws of Ghana. And therefore, anybody who feels injured or libeled or scandalized can go to law to protect themselves. So let this not be a mantra that because there are no laws or broadcasting laws in this, people cannot be held to account. So we should push that aside and say that, but that is not to suggest that the media is not there. Now, it was interesting that the same Speaker was saying the Media Commission should be given more powers. Well, the Media Commission law is fine. It actually is supposed to be in charge of the media. But the Media Commission has been operating from the same ramshackle building for almost the whole of the constitutional era. Meanwhile, the body to which the government finds favor, National Communications Authority, It's set up in a nice building, it's moving into a new headquarters, it's got places. The law favors it. So, first of all, what the national media needs is strong backing from all of us, especially the government. But government likes to control. And that was really the essence of the experiment we went through. The Constitution is very clear. You don't need a license. Now, if you read an article that I put on my Journal Live this morning, it says the definition of a license is the exercise of discretionary power. The Constitution says you don't need it. And yet, the law that we operate under, the NCA, gives the discretionary power to the minister, who is a politician, to decide whether you get or do not get a frequency to broadcast. Now, there is clearly a fundamental mismatch, and that's what we set out to do, to test what the Constitution was trying to say. And that's what we did 20 years ago.
But where do we draw the line? Now that people make all sorts of comments about the number of radio and TV stations we are having, and the fact that, you know...
Oh, I think let the laws of commerce kill that. You know, there are so many radio stations, but I doubt that anybody can talk about more than half a dozen or a dozen. So there's a lot. Many radio stations, you don't need a lot of money to set up a radio station. And a mere commercial sense will kill off all those that do not function. But again, part of the problem is that you're supposed to have regulations for the establishment of a radio station. These regulations do not exist. People have taken it upon themselves to make decisions as to who should have and not have it. Last week, the Graphic had a breakfast meeting. I think we were talking about political ownership of radio stations. A very unwelcome development, because the media is supposed to look after what the politicians do on behalf of us when we are sleeping in elections.
How well is the Media Commission performing its job as a regulator?
Well, you see, first of all, it has no real enforceability. I remember the current president of Ghana, when he was communications minister, tried to introduce the 1 minute delay law into Ghana. The journalists kicked against it because this was in the time in the euphoria about press freedom. Nana Akufo-Addo, as Attorney General, tried to establish allies which would give teeth. You see, you have what is written in the Constitution, and to make it work effectively, you have to pass legislative instrument to that effect. Against the journalists, kicked against it. So I don't think a reintroduction of criminal libel is important, you know. But we need, after 20 years, why don't we have a broadcasting law in Ghana? We don't have an act. So the law that will regulate the industry, people have been sitting on it. I remember that I wrote a memorandum in 1995 to a ministerial committee that was supposed to be passing a broadcasting law. We are still waiting for that law. We've been waiting for 21 or 22 years for the Right to Information Act to be passed, and it's still there. So I think we need to do the right things first. And part of the objective of the meeting we are having tomorrow is to come out with a roadmap in which we say that these things need to be done and done quickly, so that there isn't just now there's too many Tarzans. The whole of the broadcasting industry has become a Tarzans because everybody is doing what they like, and that is what is creating the confusion. So bringing sanity into the broadcasting industry is not a return to criminal libel.
Which is what the broadcasting law
will do. Yes, absolutely.
Let's look at the Right to Information Bill.
Yeah.
And the processes it's gone through. How do you feel about the fact that we have still not passed it?
Oh, extremely unhappy about it. But there's a certain philosophy in this country, and that philosophy is wrong. And that explains why we went the way we did. You hear a lot of workshops and conferences being held, and people, when they finish, they write a communique. We call upon, we urge. Now, the fact of the matter is that people who govern or rule over us are not interested in letting us know what is going on. So they are not going to pass You know, we've had NDC governments, MPP governments, and NDC governments again in the Fourth Republic. None of them has passed the Right to Information Bill. So for us to call on politicians, but I don't even think we need a right to information. I think if we were to be a little clever and look at the current constitution, there are ways in which we can test the right to information without actually having a bill. You know, we seem to be obsessed that we pass a law. Well, there are several laws that have been passed in this country. They haven't made one iota of difference. There are several laws which says there is something called funds that are supposed to be paid to institutions and agencies, statutory
funds.
Well, some of them haven't been paid for over a year. But the law is clear. It gives the time when they must be paid, who must pay them. You and I pay VAT. And yet our hospitals and our health providers are not doing anything.
But I guess what the Right to Information bill will do for us is to make the demands on them to give us the information.
But
because
that's exactly the point I'm making. That there are several laws that have been passed, and you don't need, unless you test the laws, unless, you know, that is what we set out to do 20 years ago. We said, since 1977, it has been theoretically possible to have private radio stations when the Frequency Board was set up under Secretary of State Afre. It was during military time, but they passed the law which allowed private broadcasting, but it never happened. Then came the 79 Constitution, which made exactly the provision that came into the 92 Constitution. And yet, from 77 until, you know, I started broadcasting in my bedroom, there was no private radio. So that's what I mean, that don't think that just because fine words are printed on a piece of paper, you're going to get your right. The same thing with demonstrations. People, you had a right to demonstrate, but the police always found a way to beat demonstrators up. Police are now finding a way now to not allow demonstrations. You know, and so you really have to keep fighting for the rights. We are too obsessed with passing laws, but making the laws work is more important than passing the law. You know, so whilst I think a right to information will be helpful, making the right demand and being prepared to enforce it. For example, if you go to a minister under the Right to Information Act to demand something and they don't give it to you, are you prepared to go to court? That is what will make it work. So we should be less enthusiastic about the law, important as they are, more enthusiastic about testing them. For example, the managing director of a sister station was arrested yesterday. The Constitution is very clear. The BNI has a right to interrogate, but the interrogation must be done in the presence of your lawyer. Now, this has happened time and time again under the Fourth Republic. People have condemned it. People are railed against it. But has anybody actually sought to test the law by saying, I am going to court, to the Human Rights Court, to say that my human rights guaranteed under the Constitution were infringed? I haven't heard of a single case.
Many people are frustrated by the system. It takes forever.
No, it doesn't. The point is that if you take the case to court, and you actually start a process, maybe the BNI will suddenly realize, hey, we need to be a bit careful here. But as long as people rail against it, we know that, oh, it will come down. You know, so I am for action, positive action, to see that the Constitution is working. Now,
but shouldn't the whole bill have in its a system which would require enforceability?
We have fantastic laws in Ghana and fantastic ways of doing things. They will even pass lovely legislative, but they say the price of vigilance, of freedom, is eternal vigilance. Somebody has to make sure that what is written is actually what is happening.
But it's worth the shot.
Well, it is worth writing the law, but we must not be satisfied just with writing the law. I can tell you of so many laws written under the Fourth Constitution which are there and which are not even observed. I can remember a classic example of the Trokosi law in which a Council of State members said, I will not observe it. and nothing was done to the person.
I see. Now let's wrap it up. Let's wrap up the conversation on the NMC. Recently, there were calls on the NMC not only to issue out licenses, but then
the NMC
they should also look at the capital requirements for the media houses that get the license.
There's a problem here, you see. Under the Constitution, the NMC regulates the media. But that function has been hijacked by the National Communications Authority under the guise that they award frequencies. So the one who awards, you can't broadcast, hopefully soon it will be passé, but you can't broadcast until somebody's awarded you a frequency. So, and also as I said earlier, all the licenses that all the 400 and over stations pay goes straight to the NCA. None of it goes to the NMC. So you can't expect...
I think I meant the NCA.
The NCA. But the NCA's function is only to grant a frequency. The management of the media is a function that is reserved for the National Media Commission. It's been hijacked by the NCA. But unfortunately, when people go and they get their license and they are making their monies, they forget that it's important that the right thing be done. And they just carry on until a problem comes.
But will capital requirements be necessary
while
the NCA issues out a license?
I think they should publish a set of regulations which you must satisfy, leading to the registration of a frequency. I insist on that. The Constitution debars, and if you have a Constitution here, put Article 1623 on the screen, debars the issuance of license. So, but the absence of regulations, so people are issued licenses which are not transparent, the process is not transparent. If you have rules published under discretionary power exercise, which was the Constitution wants us to do, it says anybody who actually has discretionary power must publish rules and regulations for the use of that power. So there are all these wonderful things which are not happening. Yes, in fact, capital is one of the requirements. But the point is that you don't know because the whole process is opaque. So you don't see it. But the point of the matter is that the NCA's assumption of the role that the NMC should have is a real problem for us.
I remember that some time back, I think last year, some radio stations complained bitterly of being victimized by the NCA, their transmissions.
But unfortunately, the whole industry didn't come to their support. This is the real killer. When one person is being victimized, the whole industry should rise up. I mean, what took place last night? Sames is my friend, but I can think of several people who have been taken in by BNI and interrogated without their lawyers over the whole period of constitutional rule. But we have not sought for the common good. That's the problem.
Is that what it will take for us to give back the NMC's its mandate?
I think that for example, we lost the case in the Supreme Court on this matter 19 years ago. We are waiting for the appeal that we launched to be empaneled. There's a constitutional review process going on, and I think part of that review process must give the whole of the industry, including the infrastructure, the management, the regulation of it, to the National Media Commission. Because the infrastructure, without it, you cannot set up the media. So there should be one body responsible for the media. The National Communications Authority has got enough problems dealing with ISPs and God knows, and telephone companies and all of that. But at the time that we sought to fight this fight, a lot of people used to say, he's a controversial figure. Ghanaians, for whose freedoms we're trying to protect, were more interested in acquiring a frequency and doing so from government than fighting for what the Constitution says. So I'm not surprised that we have a lot of political ownership and all of that. We anticipated that.
Let's look at content since Radio I, especially with private broadcasts. I know you've always said that there's choice.
Yes.
But within that choice, there's very little variety.
Absolutely. There's pluralism, but is there diversity and is there choice?
Which will be one of the discussions.
Yes. Everybody's, you know, if you tune into a morning show or even an afternoon show on a day, the same subjects are being discussed. The same panelists are moving from place to place. There is now partisanship representation. So the knowledge that the citizenry is supposed to have of balanced, impartial information is not there. But there's life beyond partisan politics. There's life beyond preparing for the next election. But that's all we hear people talking about. You know.
Again, doesn't commerce come to play here?
Well, no, I don't think so. I think the bulk of the population is being deprived of the news they need to have.
The private operators want to make profits. They want to.
I don't think they're doing very well. They could have made better profit. Don't forget, FM stations are supposed to be for local use. I think that if, for example, we used to have a station called Groove FM, which used to operate in the Osu area. I think you should, if you target your content towards satisfying the local need, then I think you can do well. But everybody's assumed that politics is what makes this country function. It isn't. If you listen to the BBC, I'm sure you do, because, you know, over a 24-hour broadcast cycle, there's so much variety and there's so much to learn and there's so much to study. We have become extremely lazy. You know, and maybe when broadcasting laws come and they define content and they define what you should do, they define things that says you don't just transmit soap operas from somewhere. Those are the areas that I think a broadcasting act will tackle well. But for the moment, if you don't like politics, forget it. But there's so much rich culture you can put on television.
But then again, it's left to the discretion of the operator. I mean, I decide what I want to do.
No, that's the whole point. Even in the so-called liberal democracies, there's a broadcasting law. So within that framework, that's what determines what you can do.
Okay, so that even if I'm an all-music radio station, I should have an element.
It should tell you what type of music you can play when. I mean, for example, in America, you cannot play music with 4-letter words. It will be bleated out immediately. You cannot play, you know, certain music at certain times. So that is what the law does.
We do that here.
No, we don't. You see, it's a voluntary thing. It's not law. Some of the responsible stations, like yours and one or two others, have a sense of responsibility in not putting out certain content at night or before 9 o'clock when children might be listening. But all of these things can be encapsulated in the law. And within that law, I mean, for example, in Europe, in Britain, you cannot do more than 12 minutes of advertising in any hour of broadcasting. Now that, if it came to happen, in fact, will be the one regulation that will kill most of these unwanted and quite frankly, stations which are not viable. Because some people just use the airwaves to sell media, to sell advertising.
I see. Now, 20 years after Radio I, after your baby. Let's have the big review so that we can wrap it up on this conversation. The big review, which will continue at tomorrow, starting tomorrow at the Accra International Conference Center. It's a 3-day event?
It's a 3-day event to be opened by the president, and we have 3 working days of very solid, serious discussion, looking at where we've come from, where we are at now, and more importantly, where we need to go into the future. We think, rather than talk about urging government and calling on government and the industry together should do a roadmap of what are the key things that we must actually have to have a sane broadcasting environment. You know, because the reason we said broadcasting pluralism, press freedom,
and democratic
is that
governance.
The three have to be working in sync. Because the whole idea, in fact, the radio high frequency 96.2, we chose it because 96 was the second election of the Fourth Republic. Because the idea is that radio should provide the choice and the balance. If you're going to vote in an election and you don't know who to vote for, then the idea that you are exercising democratic choice is laughable. 87% of Ghanaians now are supposed to get their information from radio. Let us make that count. Let us make that medium the medium of rich, informative programming, so that people are better informed, and when they go to make their choice, then they can make it on the basis. Don't forget, universal adult suffrage is that anybody who is 18 and not mad, it doesn't qualify it by beauty such as yours, it doesn't qualify it by money, it doesn't qualify it by status, has the same vote.
So this event starts 9 a.m.
9 a.m.
tomorrow at the Accra International Conference
That's
Center.
right. That's
if
right.
I want to be part of
I think I've already invited you.
No,
if you want to be part,
not me.
if you want to be part of it,
you have invited me, that's true.
if you want to be part of it, and you work for a broadcasting company which has made a lot of money, we charge just conference fee of 300 Ghana cedis for the 3 days, and you should come and be part of the discussion, because the future of the industry, if we don't have this discussion, the first estate of the realm and the fourth of the state of the realm will soon become one. Because as was said last week, too many politicians, you know, one of the first
are going into owning media houses.
One of the first stations was set up by somebody who is a minister and a very important minister now. Okay? And we are getting into this situation where the politicians, you have more pluralism, but they control it. And I don't think we should have that.
Do you intend to resurrect Radio Eye someday?
Oh, absolutely not. I think Radio Eye was set up to test the law. If the law changes, and if indeed we believe that we can present a different and more credible and rational type of radio, we might do that. But I still insist that I do not need a license. And therefore, anybody trying to offer me a license is insulting my human rights.
That's interesting. But you're sure you're going to have power throughout the conference with our current power situation?
Well, actually, it was on the first day at the conference center, and then we moved to Kofi Annan Center for ICT. Both venues, of course, being venues of great national events, have standby generators.
You're counting on that one? You're counting on it because you don't trust the ECG. They'll take away your power anytime.
It's not ECG's fault, though.
But I deal with the ECG. I barely deal with the VRA. And so the ECG can make an excuse with the VRA. No,
but you see, as I said when I talked about power, or you talk about anything, they say, share the cake. If you don't create it, you cannot share it. If the power is not generated, ECG cannot give you power. The biggest problems facing us in this country now, in the power sector, is supply.
Are we dealing with it well?
No, but that's another subject. You see,
yes.
For 6 or 7 years, a lot of promises have been made. But I don't know that anybody has made any real concrete effort, such as taking a bill to Parliament or taking an agreement to Parliament on let's say, a coal plant. There's been a mention of a coal plant, there's been a mention of LNG, there's been a mention of so many different things. But the proof of the pudding, as they say,
it's in the eating.
Yeah, and exactly. So until you actually start taking action. And what happens is that we take too long about everything in Ghana. There's a project in Solar, which was on the drawing board for 27 years until the president cut the sword in 2012. By that time, everybody wants power. By that time, all the best laid plans you have gone out of the window. You know, so I think I'll come back and talk to you about the power situation.
I guess we should.
quite critical.
We should have that conversation. Thank you very much, Doc. Dr.
Thank you.
Charles Rekuk-Brobe is Chief Policy Analyst with GIPO. He's also promoter of Radio I 96.2. I'm sure you remember that if you're older than I am. I wasn't there. No, I wasn't.
Oh,
I wasn't. But from the 19th of November to the 21st of November 2014, you can be part of this program, Broadcasting Pluralism, Press Freedom and Democratic Governance, organized by GIPO. It will be opened at the Accra International Conference Center at exactly 9 a.m. tomorrow by President John Dramani Mahama. The rest of the conference would be, for the 20th and 21st, will be at the Kofi Annan Press Center. Is that it?
For the curious, GIPO stands for the Ghana Institute for Public Policy Options.
That's true.
So, thank you very much, Kemini, for your time, and thank you
Thank you too for coming.
Audience.
It's been fantastic talking to you. I've had a lot of fun and learned from you as well.
I heard you had to come from your holiday.
Oh no, don't say that.
I am pleased about that.
No, don't say that. But that's it for this hour. Thank you very much for your company. For more news, visit myjoyonline.com.
Can I walk away now?
And yes, my name is Kemini Yamani Yamana. Good morning.